Good afternoon, and welcome to the Interdisciplinary Center's virtual space. My name is Susan Derwin, and I'm the IHC Director. As the public face of the humanities for the UC Santa Barbara campus, our center mounts programs, including this public event, that draws upon the expertise, practices, and skills associated with the humanities to support scholars in the production of new knowledge, to empower community members to be agents of social change, and to learn about the works of artists and writers that address the most compelling themes and concerns of our society. Before I introduce today's guests, I want to make sure you're aware of the question and answer function on your screen. You can submit questions to our speakers at any time during the event, and when their talk concludes, we will pose as many of your questions as possible to them. A recording of this event will be posted to our website in the near future. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located. And I would also like to pay respect to elders, both past and present, as well as to other Indigenous people present. Throughout this academic year, the IHC's public event series has focused on the theme of regeneration. Scholars and artists who have been exploring this theme have done so with an eye toward imagining how contemporary societies can establish foundations of solidarity to support and foster environmental sustainability, social equity, multiple forms of creative expression, and cultures of intergenerational care. Given our series focus, you can imagine how delighted and grateful I was when Professors Dominique Julien and Catherine Neschi of French and Comparative Literature approached me about inviting today's guests, Sandra Laugier and Alexandre Gefen, to present in our series. Laugier's and Gefen's work on the ethics of care, remediation, and attachment as they relate to fragile individuals, devastated communities, and democratic institutions speaks directly to our series theme. And I am certain that their presentation today will bring original insights and renewed urgency to the topic. So thank you, Kathy and Dominique, for your support of and contribution to the IHC series. And also allow me to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Hester and Cedric Crowell Endowment. And it is with great pleasure that I will now introduce our speakers. Philosopher Sandra Laugier is a professor at the University of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. She has published extensively on ordinary language philosophy, moral and political philosophy, gender studies, and the ethics of care, and on popular film and TV series. Her recent publications include Why We Need Ordinary Language Philosophy, Politics of the Ordinary, Care, Ethics, and Forms of Life, and the co-edited Cavell's Must Me Mean What We Say at 50. She has also translated most of Stanley Cavell's work and is among the editors of his Nachlass. Our second speaker, Alexandre Gefen, is a research professor at the French National Center for Scientific Research and Deputy Scientific Director of the Institute of Human and Social Sciences of the CNRS. He has published a number of books on literary theory and contemporary French literature and culture, and he is a pioneer in the field of digital humanities. His recent monograph in the field of literary studies, Réparer le Monde, will appear in English this year. Welcome, Professors Laugier and Gefen.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. It's an honor to be there. And we're going to speak about maintaining life and repairing the world. So I'm going to speak about the COVID pandemic. It had revealed radical vulnerabilities, the vulnerability of institutions, of the species, of the planet, also of fragile populations, of workers on the front line, and of each individual. So the importance of caring for others and the importance of those who care for us, whomever us is, became obvious during this pandemic. So for someone who works on care ethics, it was a very important moment, and the very grammar of care has imposed itself upon all of us, because vulnerabilities are never so visible as in these situations where the normal form of life is interrupted, is disrupted. And so the distraction of the space of ordinary life and of weak ties has also undermined the democratic space. So the question is, how can public life and human interaction, how can they recover? And sometimes we imagine that we are out of, okay, sorry. We are imagine that we are out of the COVID pandemic, and now we seem to evoke a return to normal life with relief. And actually, this is also a pathology that is linked to the pandemic, and it reveals something about the nature of the period we think we are emerging from, a period of collective suspension, of fear of others, and also a time of denial, the denial regarding our condition. So the pandemic is a collective disease of the soul that affects us all. And this is what the word pandemic means. Of course, we are affected as a whole, and it is the very form of human life that is disrupted. And I'm thinking, because some of you know I work on TV shows, I'm thinking of this great show called The Leftovers, HBO, where 2% of the world's population disappears from the surface of the earth, and we are all somehow survivors. So in this series, there is no explanation, but it describes the moral life which has been unostentatiously shattered of the remaining inhabitants. And in the series, they are called remnants. They're like leftovers, like leftover food. And so there's a kind of trauma with the disappearance of a part of humanity, and it makes visible the difficulty and the cruelty of the human form of life. You remember that, for example, we had these signs on the seats saying that you have to leave this seat free, signs that appeared in metros around the world, and they have more or less disappeared, but they seem like a reminder, conjuring of what we call in France the place of the dead. And so there is this idea of vulnerability of life itself. So not only vulnerability as a general and empty word, but what is called bare life by Giorgio Agamben, a life exposed to death. And so the pandemic accentuates the persistent sovereign power to take life in a modern era where humanity already lives most of their life at a distance. So the pandemic appeared as a threat to human life, both in the vital sense and also in the social sense. So it's a risk to societal life and to biological life. And so you have here a revelation of the vulnerability of normal, ordinary life. And this is precisely a normalcy that was threatened and rendered strange and uncanny. So the ordinary life, in the sense of this everyday life, was suddenly made visible and revealed through its absence, and in the disappearance of what defines ordinary life, the anonymous interaction on the street, on buses, in public spaces, and all this shared experience of having coffee, conversation. So what we call the weak ties has been totally threatened. And so I think of Stanley Cavell, of course, because he would have certainly understood this pandemic as a powerful attack on the psyche and the life of the soul that will need regeneration indeed. And so this is why we have the of pandemic, that is this global vulnerability, the vulnerability of life, of species, of the world and the vulnerability of a form of life itself. And this is something the anthropologist Binadas evokes when she speaks about the notion of form of life as death, just like Agamben. And she speaks in the passage I won't read about a kind of blurring of what is life and what is not life. And it is something you find also in Agamben and Foucault, who took an interest in the processes by which the management of life becomes a state matter and therefore inaugurated the notion of a biopolitical state. And from Agamben's perspective on this biopolitics, the fact that a biopolitical state can strip someone down and render a bare life, a life bare produces body, then can be killed with total impunity or with complete discretion. So it's not, of course, the same situation. And the power is not the power to kill or to let live, as in Agamben, but it's the power of letting die. And so to let die is political. And this is why Ginadas decides to follow Cavert in a distinction that is very important to us, the distinction between two meanings of the Wittgensteinian concept of a form of life, the social and conventional modalities of relations between human beings, so the social form of life, but also the form of life, so with an emphasis on life and not only on form, as the terrain of the globally shared virus. And so this is why, so I'm showing just a book on care, but briefly, this is why I've been working so much on the ethics of care, and this is why it appeared as so central, because the importance of care and the people who care of us appear to everyone, and ignorance also on the part of the entire society of what makes it live. And so this is what is finally obvious. And this is also what is invisible in the social world. And what is invisible is what is usually just under our eyes, but something we don't pay attention to. And this form of life is totally ignored. And so the work of care, especially, is something that actually mostly women do. And it has undoubtedly become more visible, at least for a time. But seeing and hearing women's voices and welcoming the perspective of the other are not the same thing. And so you had all these people like sweeping milk and emptying trash cans, picking up masks, all this work that usually we think does not require any particular dexterity or skill. And everywhere, the burden of domestic work remains much heavier for women, even if men were more numerous among the sick. And it is also a big source of domestic conflict. Many studies have shown that, for example, educational duty and the absence of school were carried out mostly by mothers in the United States, actually in France too. And also all these people who are busy holding the world together, recreating this, recreating life, recreating a semblance of ordinary life, were not credited with having any expertise. And so the professions as peers that were mainly involved in the fight against COVID by supporting us, by supporting everyday life, where the care assistants and the work nurses, cashiers, delivery people, you all know that. And so this is who provides care in society or provide security. And women play a crucial everyday place, everyday role in the production of domestic sphere that is very important to human life in general. And so here, something emerges. It's the truth of our dependencies, and we are forced to pay attention two neglected realities to care, and we have to care. Care is beyond an ethic, is something that has revealed itself as a relevant tool for analyzing the new situation. So care is a concept for the COVID. And so it's also maybe a resource, a way to find new resources for our forms of life. And this is why this unveiling of what makes us live, it's not merely the discovery that there are social hierarchies and injustice, but it's also a radical discovery, the fact that we live in a world of inverted values, values where the most useful people are considered as nothing. And it is precisely this situation that allows others to prosper. And so this injustice or this reversal is shown in a very nice way, well, nice, very strong way, in the beautiful film Parasite by Bong Joon-ho, who had a prize at Cannes Festival. And the real parasites in this film are not the small-time frauds and criminals. It is the privileged who live off the work and care of the other. So there is something that appears to everyone, I think, at the core of the ethics of care and the work of care, the fact that it is underappreciated at the exact moment when its importance is becoming apparent to everybody. And care has long been the epitome of what has been neglected and disrespected by public policies. And today we are paying the price of the recurring contempt for both the activities and the feeling of care. So the jobs that are most useful to everyone are the least well paid, the least well regarded. So it's a great paradox. And so it's not only the structural injustices that the epidemic has brought to light, it's not only the gap between people who enjoyed the comfort of second homes and those who remain in the city and so on. It is the lack of comprehension, and this is the core of the ethics of care, the lack of comprehension by an entire society or species of what allows it to live. And this is why the definition of care that you all know by John Tronto become so true. Caring is viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. So she speaks about also, life sustaining well. And so here, I'm showing a book on vulnerability that I wrote with a French political woman, Najat Vallaud-Belkacem, because we were really struck by the radical vulnerabilities that has been revealed by the pandemic and the fact that caregivers take care of our forms of life, and the fact that, as Michel Foucault said, society must be defended. So he said it with a kind of irony, but those who defend it are the invisible people who until recently were totally taken for granted. And so what is, and I will conclude there, what is really new now is that vulnerability becomes the primary human trait, and it takes precedence over autonomy, which we were discussing the other day with Catherine. Autonomy, so praised by philosophers, turns out to be an optical illusion because the autonomy of some is made possible by the work of others. So the more someone is helped and the more they gain in autonomy. And the pandemic has revealed that we are all vulnerable. This is very true, but we are not vulnerable in the same way or to the same degree, including with the case of health risk, which have certainly disproportionately affected the oldest people, but also the poorest. So the paradox is that vulnerability is both universal and unevenly distributed. And this is also something that you see with the geographic and ethnic statistics of the COVID death. And so this sudden visibility of the invisible is something that is so striking because care workers are said to be invisible, but they became so visible because they were the only people outside in the streets in Paris, at least. And so somehow they stand out. So they are invisible, but also because they are too visible. So maybe autonomy is not the right concept. Invisibility is not. So why do we speak about invisibility? And I will quote, of course, Wittgenstein, which is my favorite author, when he says that some things escape us just because they are always before our eyes. And also, there's something very close in Foucault, and maybe Foucault is the one who probably most clearly defined what a philosophy of the visible should be. And he says we have long known that the role of philosophy is not to discover what is hidden, but to render visible what precisely is visible. So the fact it's not that we have to make visible the invisible, it's to make the visible visible, and we are blind not because what we do not see might be invisible or hidden, but before we do not see or cannot bear to see our vulnerability. And so this is why care is about the maintenance of the world, the everyday maintenance, response to specific needs, sensitivity to ordinary details of human life that matter. So the idea of mattering is central. It is a paradigm shift in ethics. And so the ethical affirmation of the importance and dignity of care cannot go today without a political reflection on the allocation of resources and the social distribution of tasks that this allocation determines. And so this is why we call for this the end of this moral blindness, a way to overcome this blindness. Of course, I don't have time for that, but I have been working a lot also about series and TV shows and films because these apocalyptic or zombie films are actually raising exactly the same question: what constitutes our life now that the form of life, the form or form seem lost? So you know about the film Don't Look Up, for example, which is about this specific blindness. You know about also one of my favorite shows. I won't resist to show an image of it, The Walking Dead, which is also a series that retrospectively detects signs of the dehumanization to come in the previous normal way of life. And so all these movies or series question what really constitutes the ordinary, our ordinary life. And so the pandemic destroys the space of ordinary life and what we call also the public space, so the streets, cafes, where the daily anonymous interactions used to occur. And it has also weakened the democratic public space and what Alexandre and I have called the weak ties, the weaklings. So I stop here. Wait, I show you this book. So now it's Alexandre's turn.
What is the contribution of the art and literature, in particular, to the expectation of reparation and social transformation? How does literature recreate relation and relationships? Does it participate in the response to a political demand for social resilience, or does it propose other types of narratives? Can it contribute to the development of an ethic of care, and if so, how? As I tried to show in Réparer le monde, la littérature française face au XXIe siècle, et l'idée littérature, an investigation of literature today confronts us with a literature that is thought as performance, as action, as an intervention outside the aesthetic frameworks that had prevailed until now. The idea, colored with neo-humanism of a literary act, participate in a return to a transitivity of the literature, which is interested in concrete social, political, and cultural questions. The notion of autonomy of art is criticized in this work in the name of the notion of relation and the requirement of intervention. Relational literature and field literature makes the writing a form of attention to the world and of reading a new form of sharing. I show also a few of my books through this presentation. The relativization of the criteria of intransitivity, disinterestedness, and self-sufficiency is essential for us to read contemporary literary work in their diversity, what we call in French études de terrain, survey, testimonial narrative, non-fiction, etc. We need to understand the contemporary inflection in the direction of a literature of analysis, alertness, and intervention. As Thomas Pavel has shown, by relying on what he calls a speculative history of the novel, the cognitive, therapeutic, ethical, and politic virtues are as old as literature itself and are indeed part of an anthropological function proper to verbal activity used for the purpose of representation. Even literature conceived purely to entertain participate in the joyful exercise of our skill to grasp the variety of situation and way of life. We can bet that the pleasure principles that accompanies it is due to the low-cost playful training of our cognitive function. The same is true of the form of action and performance that occupy a part of contemporary literary creation and that revives the ancient communicational and political regime of the rhetorical action. At the risk of seeming less innovating, even reactionary, if we think about the return of the realistic novel like in Welbeck, the contemporary moment rediscover an artistic regime as much determined by ingenuity and skill as by originality, as unique creative value. The project of aesthetic autonomy might have been a mere parenthesis, and the focus on the specific poetic function of literary language, a theoretical myopa. Over the long term, literature is a device of cognitive and affective mediation in and through language, in its double dimension of representation and action. To think of literature in relational terms implies a pragmatic approach, which considers fiction as a participant in the real and even as an agent intervening in the real, in the space of representation and symbol, but also in the social sphere, in the interaction between individuals and even in the bodies. Certainly, the autonomy of literature was a value in society laboring under the pressure of heavy political, moral, and religious system of meaning. The autonomy of literature aspired to the emancipation of the subject and in a specific Western cultural construction to liberal individualism. But in a secularized society like ours, inviting the individual to be heteronomous, to develop and to transform himself by assuming the loss of the bond which previously accompanies the individual literature comes to reverse it, to propose itself as a relation. We are talking about a relational turn in literary history. It could be the question of enabling a relation of readers to themselves by inviting them to participate in an interior quest for narrative identity, like Ricker said, or of creating relation between readers and authors, or of creating community of readers, of amateur writers, or of making the writer the one who is going to recreate a sense of social community in workshop or in residence of writing, or of reinventing a sense of civic community by defending the political function of literature. This turn is moreover resisted by a criticism for which it is not the author and the text that are central, but rather the individual reader and the very concrete question of reception and the effects of the text. The project of bringing together a community through the resonance and weak ties implied by literature corrects the writer withdrawal into the moment of writing and reverse the idea that literature is a deliberate alienation of the writer and of the reader from society. The individual empowerment of the reader is conceived as the necessary precondition for the constitution of new local and situated communities where the people who is missing, as Deleuze famously put in, can come together in order to repair the dislocation of their identity, the destruction of their relationship to work, and the loss of their local anchorage caused by decades of economic crisis and the disintegration of discourse of reference. Literary theory makes note of this new political ambition of literature. In the United States, the promotion of writing as an incentive to living together through the sensitive moral education of each individual enabled by the novel, an empathetic device through which we can learn about and recognize the suffering of others, was inspired by Nussbaum's work on poetic justice. In France, many critics, like Nelly Wolff, for instance, analyze the modern novel as a mimesis of a new social contract, the one that founds the modern democracy, and a kind of simulation by the reading of the posture and the democratic reflex. The literature will initiate to the living together because in a kind of serious game, the fiction will help us to understand and respect others. Whether one underlines the role of intelligence or that of the affects, the manufacture of consensus or the catharsis of conflictualities, essayists and theorists become attentive again to the training of the democratic virtue by the literature, exercise of discovery of the otherness by the exit of oneself, supporting the sense of the equality and the pluralism. This democratic function is exercised in a context where digital technology and social nature concretely facilitate the democratization of writing, which continues at instance the democratization of reading that characterize the modern era. This movement is inseparable from the digital turn and the new importance of social practices accompanying literature, writer residency, festival, reading club, or writing workshop at a time when a recognition of the citizen importance and literature and its intermediaries, bookseller and publisher, seems to have been deeply imposed in institutions. Literature is exhibited in subway train or on bus shelter. It is financed by public authorities as a tool facilitating the social link and is promoted as an instrument of constituting a common world. Some amateur practice of collaborative writing, let's think, for example, platforms like Wattpad or fanfiction.net, experiment with original modality of horizontal democratic organization, while writers theorize new way of saying we. What do these literature of relationship link actually look like? One can first think of the vast spectrum of interactional social practices promoting the transfer of experience, collective or shared reflexivity in reading or writing bookshop, often close to social intervention led by writers who sometimes come to take up residence in prison, hospital for retired, school, asylum for the unemployed, etc. Very influential here is as much in Wittgenstein, the political and social approach to art as form of life of Dewey. His founding text, Art as Experience, was the exact contemporary of the utopia of the avant-garde seeking to refound social practices through art. Dewey stands in opposition to aesthetics stemming from Kant or even from Hegel in a goal that aims to uproot the common presupposition of this aesthetic and to do away in a certain way with the very notion of aesthetic, which refuses the separated art clearly distinct from a non-art dedicated to his own cult and distinction. The objective is to refuse the compartmentalizing logic of Western modernity. As Schusterman said, we separate art from life by making of art its own subject, and instead to revalorize popular art, even to tend towards the fusion of aesthetic and mode of existence, for example, around the notion of still of life, against the notion of the artistic oeuvre. Making and making together are then as important as the result, the artistic production belonging to a form of ordinary life. This policy of proximity addressed, which often lead to work less descriptive than relational, interactive, and performative, are well identified in art. In the Anglo-American field as form of inclusive local policy, which embrace a vast spectrum of pedagogical and creative activities, valuing the knowledge proper to the individuals and the community in their capacity to produce habitable worlds. In the contemporary field, these varied practices are better understood in Europe, notably through the mediation of Rita Alfeschi's work on the social uses of literature, in particular narrative medicine. They are well identified in many genres, like post-dramatic theater, for example, the work in France of François Bon, whose manual devoted to writing workshop is a referent work. It's called Tous les mots sont adultes, for prison or working class environment. Or for giving another example, the work of Mathieu Simonet, who promotes various collaborative projects, including a collective autobiography consisting of circulating patient notebook recounting their teenage years in hospitals. Poets like Christophe Hanna or Franck Lebovici has also tried to refound poeticity in performance and in a Wittgensteinian perspective to work on public discourse rather than to praise private language. At the same time, a new conception of literary fiction emerged, making it not only an image, a representation of the world, but a potential viral agent. It is capable of transforming the framework of our perception by questioning the language and the discourses, and by influencing the political, legal, and social debate. The role of fiction is particularly strong to give justice to the invisible, to the dominated. It is essential in the awareness of the ecological crisis, and it is necessary in the necessary post-colonial transformation of our behaviors. Breaking with the principle that art must not make anything happen, the influence of philosophy of ordinary life is patent in these approaches that retains the importance of the force of perlocution, of action in language, and that are sensitive to what Foucault presents as a tactical dimension of language, and that expose how language present our vulnerability according to the sceptical lesson of Stanley Cavell. Apart from this very concrete form of relationship, which we have given some example, literature helps to compensate for the dissolution of traditional form of connection by reinstating the political. The way in which literature is enforced, invested with a desire for justice and political action, and returns to the art of the city to participate in a setting of dialogue of values and the construction of the strong or weak bonds which make community, is here an essential cultural fact. Directly performative or simply politically sensitive, this writing mobilized a literary ethics of attention and reparation, which engage a politic of recognition in the service of communities, of marginalized form of life, and of an active fight against a form of domination by promoting an art of extended existence, which is often accompanied by a certain radicality. The performant art are the operators of a cultural identity able to think the differentialism. Think, for example, to the feminist or trans dimension of very numerous performance where the body is directly implied. The ambition is to concretely transform the world by offering original view and by producing counter-discourse. It is at the heart of contemporary fiction. It is demonstration by many texts I don't have any more time to examine, like Christine Angot, Edouard Louis, Virginie Despentes. In all these cases, situated knowledge is the form of action promised by literature. And it seems the characteristic of the literary knowledge now, such as in any case that our contemporary society value it, to release exemplary shames and to decipher motive while incarnating them in bodies and situations always particular, to install a new semantic to enjoy to the transformation of the world without denying its complexity and the pluralism of the point of view. I will give now the floor to Sandra for a short conclusion.
So I'm just going to use the last minutes to tie our talks together and to talk about the weak ties, which is, we did this book on weak ties, and it's the expression that we have used to describe the new realities that we have to face and maybe new resources for living them. However, the concept of weak ties, as you may know, has been introduced into sociology by Mark Granovetter in 1973 in a classic article called The Strength of Weak Ties. And it is based on the opposition between strong ties, so the friendship, family, marriage, work, and social ties with little emotional and institutional charge, which are essential to the functioning of human interaction. So we did this book on weak ties before the pandemic, but it turns out that it is, of course, a very important concept for modern sociology, but also a resource in times of pandemic. And so the theory of weak ties leads us to view social cohesion in new terms. And so the very weakness of the ties presides over the accessibility of the world and allows us to dream of it as a community outside of normative constraint systems. So with containment, with lockdown, with social distancing, the concept has taken on a new validity, and the singularity of the present time is indeed the combined distraction and strengthening of weak ties. And so there is social distancing, the threat of the rupture of interdependencies. It's the end of meetings and conversations in public. At some point, we didn't even, couldn't even talk in the subway. It was forbidden because to avoid spreading the virus. And so the weak ties seemed very fragile, but by making ordinary social ties impossible, by inviting us to reduce our relationship to family ties and to practice individualism, there's this kind of worldwide social experiment initiated by the pandemic that has not destroyed this web of weak ties that make up the texture of ordinary life or form of life, but somehow it has densified and redeployed it. So how come the texture of human life is indeed a network of forms of life, and the multiple connections of actions and persons, of links that are constantly threatened with rupture, but which, like the links that make up a cable, draw their resistance from their overlapping, from their weakness itself. And society is also held together by all these weak ties, like, family reunions by Zoom, or other kinds of meetings. And so the democracy itself has been transformed by this concept. It's not an institution, it's not a political structure only, but it is a form of life now woven by and in weak ties. And it lives in the vital and social sense by the weakness or plasticity of the ties that bind citizens rather than than by their strong ties to a kind of power. And so fortunately, even if with all the trauma and the difficulties of the pandemic, the resistance and regeneration of our societies cannot be reduced to an adaptive capacity, and weak ties and care hold society together, share narratives, plays that have become common, everything that is ordinary and gratuitous gestures that we have now to reinvent in order to decide together what matters to us. Thank you.
Thank you both
Yeah.
so much. Let me invite our audience to submit their questions. And I think I'll start with a proposition that I dare say you will both disagree with. I think it's possible to create a story about the situation that you've just described to us, when now a grammar of care is imposing itself upon us. And the story would go, we've now seen, we were morally blind. We had a lack of comprehension of the very thing that allows us to live. We recognize our vulnerability. And now all we need to do is receive the moral education that literature will provide. What's wrong with that sentence? How have you not suggested that? In other words, is it a question of our becoming aware when we were ignorant? Is that what the pandemic has enabled in a certain way? Or has something else, are we naive, in other words? To say that we're morally blind is to suggest that we just need to be made to see, and that maybe literature can sort of, make the veils fall from our eyes. Yeah. So would you please destroy that proposition?
Okay, thank you so much. I start just by saying that our point is not that we were blind and now we see. I mean, this is not the point. What is very striking is that the fact that we see but we imagine we are blind. It means that we see things and the other people, the care work are suddenly visible, but actually, as soon as we discover that, we kind of, hide that again, and we kind of deny and repress it. So I wouldn't say that literature is also a way of consolation for that, but Alexandre, maybe we'll add something about that.
Literature open up our eyes to other point of view and to the contradiction between the point of view. It's a tool for creating a kind of tunnel between you and me, between she and him. So it is very basic use, I think, to open the wall that is your mind, the mind of the other. So there is nothing very new, but the current situation have presented a lot of new actors, actor of care, new kind of invisible. And I think a part of, as I know, French literature has given some importance to them.
Mm-hmm. So it's really not about discovering something we didn't know because we were, naive or stupid or selfish, even if we are anyway. But it's really about acknowledging something we knew, but we still want to repress, even if it's right there under our eyes.
And the we in that grammar, how does that we constitute itself? Who is the we, or what is the we?
This is always the question. So we are speaking from our subjective point of view as privileged citizens, and so the we obviously is a we that doesn't include everyone, but this is what the we does. It's really speaking for others, but this is the question about what we are. We use the we because the denial, the blindness is ours.
All right. Our audience has some big questions for both of you, which I will remind you, we have about 7 minutes to answer them. So,
Sorry.
as it always is, the first question for both of you is no less than, where do you think humanity goes from here, both short-term and long-term?
So,
It's for you, Sandra, it is for you. What I can say is that literature is creating a lot of dystopian and utopian possible worlds. But which one are we taking? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I don't think we can answer the question. This is why other fiction, the post-apocalyptic genre is not only for fun, it's really where this kind of questions are answered. It's not answered by people like us or by, by philosophers.
One of the audience members mentioned the book and then the film The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and noted that those films or those texts, cinematic and literary, have a feature similar to The Walking Dead, which is the effect of destroying public life. Yeah, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah,
it's your turn.
Yes, it's really, it was already there in The Road. What is interesting in The Walking Dead also, which is why I showed it, is that it destroys, it shows a world where there is no public life and also no rules, no ethics. So how can we build a world where not only the political, the public life, but also the private and the ethical behaviors are threatened? And what is interesting in The Walking Dead, but also in The Road, is the fact that you yourself, the viewer, lose also your capacity for judgment. So this is what's powerful about these works.
Yeah. I thought of again, to come back to your first comment, Sandra, about how the grammar of care has imposed itself. I mean, in The Road, just to say, it's really language that survives and generates, right? I mean, so the writing of the text, which might speak to what you're talking about, Alexandre, as generating, going back etymologically, recuperating, saving meanings of words as a way to move forward, which only literature can really do, right, when the world has been destroyed. Let me ask you another question from our audience. Do you sense an urgency in terms of the opportunity to reimagine and regenerate? If the pandemic is a rupture to societal norms, an opening to take new action, it seems that this time is an opportunity, but also poses new threats to the social fabric. So what are our possibilities and what are the new threats to the social fabric?
Well, I can start with the urgency, because obviously this pandemic is an opportunity to regenerate. This is why we were so interested in your question, because it's a way of being aware of giving priority to what is really important, and to give also, a voice to people who cannot decide what is important. So this is really the most important point. Of course, there are threats to the social fabric, and we have discussed this with the idea of weak ties, because the pandemic has destroyed the very, the encounters in public and everything that is that constitutes the fabric of life. And this is what needs to be regenerated. Alexandre, tu es pas d'accord?
I can just add that for philosophers like Bruno Latour, there was great expectation for the after of the pandemic as a way to rethink our relation to our environment, because the pandemic could have be some proxy to understanding the climate change, but the consequences in France, for instance, like new sovereignty, the demand for demondialization, de-worlding, is something both interesting in terms of ecological gain, but also frightening, because it's for the right, the extreme right wing, an agenda of breaking with Europe and with the exchange and communication. So I'm not sure the direction the future will be again.
Yeah, because there is a very strong will in many people to just deny that we are dependent on the environment and on other people who take care of us. So it's both the present time is really an opportunity to understand what we depend on and the fact that our lives depend also on the environment. This is why there is this connection between environment and the health crisis, but there is also some very strong, will, like patriarchy, of course, and extremist, right-wing ideas that is always denying, that has this myth of, the autonomy, and this is denying this vulnerability, and I think this is the main challenge.
Well, thank you both. Our time is up for really providing an optic about sort of fundamental conditions and cares and opportunities. So thank you. Thanks to our audience for joining the event.
Thank you all. Thanks for the great questions.
When you leave, please take a moment to fill out our post-event survey, and you'll also be able to sign up for our mailing list. So again, Sandra, Alexandre, our guests, have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.